Hello. You are about to hear some amazing stories about American history, about parts of it that you may not have known much about, but that contribute so much to who we are today. You're going to hear about small town weekly newspapers and small town entrepreneurship. For about 150 to 200 years, almost every small town in the United States had a weekly newspaper. Wilton, Iowa, a town of 1,800 people, had its own weekly newspaper. Solon, Iowa had 200 people. It had its own weekly newspaper. These papers were often run and operated by couples. Often these couples had children that they had to take care of in addition to the 10, 12, sometimes 18-hour days that they spent putting these newspapers out. You've heard the adage, behind every great man is a good woman. Well, in these cases, the good women were not behind their men, they were right beside them, working right beside them. They gathered the stories, they wrote the stories, they set the linotypes, they printed, they distributed, often all by themselves. Sometimes they might have a worker or two, but a lot of this they did by themselves. And then, when they went home, in many of these cases, the men would help with the housework, with the children. These people were far, far ahead of their times. Before we had print material, in order to read a book, the Bible mostly, thousands of scribes had to sit and handwrite every page. Every book represented one person sitting down and writing everything by hand. In the mid-11th century, the Chinese invented movable type, and it was a revolution. It meant that once you had the page set, it could be printed over and over and over. It still didn't make a whole lot of copies, but it was a big difference. 400 years later, Gutenberg introduced this to Europe. That's how we got the Gutenberg Bible. Another 400 years, in Germany, the linotype was invented. Another revolution. One man could sit at a keyboard and type out almost an entire newspaper in just a matter of a few hours. It was a lot faster than hand setting. However, in the small newspapers, these machines were expensive. They all got them eventually, but they were expensive. And even after they got them, many of them continued to use the hand setting for things like headlines, often advertising. Sometimes they even did it still for parts of the newspaper. In around 1980, these newspapers and other printers started to use computers to do their typesetting. Many of the people who ran these newspapers, my parents being one of them, my dad started in the newspaper business in 1937. He stopped in 1987. His career literally went from Gutenberg to Gates. Imagine that. In 50 short years, one person had done the entire gamut of what newspaper journalism, what print journalism was. The other piece of this is the small town bankers. Many of these couples who printed these newspapers didn't have any money. The shops were expensive to buy. So these small town bankers would find people who could do the newspaper, and they'd give them enormous amounts of money for the Times, often with just good feelings. When Fritz and Marjorie Arrowsmith went to Solon, Iowa, wanting to buy the Solon Economist, which was almost on its last legs, he had a lot of experience at the Linotype. He had worked for a little while at a small town newspaper. She had only taken a journalism course in high school. But the banker, his name was Marketan, he just had a feeling that they were going to be able to do it. And he knew the importance of that newspaper to his community. Thinking that they could do it and wanting his community to have a newspaper, to not lose that, he gave them all this money. That's how it worked in those days. But you're going to hear this in a lot more detail from Fritz Arrowsmith. Sit back and enjoy it. Whether your interest is just American history or the history of newspapers, the history of journalism in this country, or just social history in general, you are going to get a lot out of this. Enjoy.